You look familiar.
Yes.
I've seen you around the conference.
Yes. I am a conference goer, and
Right.
a poet who would like to ask questions of the great early poet. So, my first question is, has a poem ever gotten you into or out of a fight?
No.
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 Okay.
But I know people who, I know people whose poems have gotten them into trouble. I mean, there's a guy, I won't mention his name, but he had a poem published in the New Yorker some years ago. It was about like swimming at night with this naked woman, and his wife divorced him.
Oh.
I mean, she said, I wasn't there. So, why would you ask me if a poem I had written got me into a fight?
I think.
Are you looking for a fight?
If you want to fight,
You want some of this?
I will take you on.
Bring it.
Yes.
Bring it, baby.
I think you could probably kick my ass. So.
If you were running away from me, I could.
Oscar Wilde said, "A poet can survive everything but a misprint." Have you ever been misprinted?
Misprinted?
Yes.
Oh yeah. I mean, they say there's no such thing as a perfect book. I mean, you can find a typo in any book. But I guess there are more flagrant forms of being misrepresented visually, and one of them is only a couple of magazines did this, but they just like center the poem. You know, and poetry has a sculptural shape to it, and if it's published somewhere, it's supposed to look exactly the way you composed it, you know, with stanza breaks and lineation and all that. And so a couple of times that's happened, but it's not usual. But the controversy, small one, but that has arisen, is with e-poetry, if you will. If you put poems on a screen like an iPod or an iPhone or on Kindle or whatever, the shape of the screen changes the shape of the poem.
Right.
It screws it up, basically, ruins it. So it turns out that poetry is not completely amenable to being electronically squeezed into these little screens. That's not your problem.
But well, it is.
It's not a big problem.
In your poem "Mad Men," you talk about the volatility of poems and how if you talk about it before it's done, it could fly away.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of happens in the poem of yours. Now, were you disappointed that you didn't get to write that poem, but you got, what was your feeling that?
Well, no, I got something out of it, which was this other poem, so I'm happy to.
All right.
I mean, apparently that was the poem I was supposed to be writing, so the other one just flew away. But I think, certainly novelists and fiction writers, short story writers talk more about that than poets, because a poem doesn't have much of a plot, and it might have a shred of a theme, but it's not like saying, I'm going to write a novel about two couples that, and these two marriages that interlock or something. I think you can vitiate, and does that mean take the energy away from?
I think so.
Or vichyssoise is what I'm
thinking. Yes.
You can
Cold
vichyssoise
potato soup.
a cold potato soup, a project. It becomes part of your shtick. It becomes a story you tell. So what are you working on? I'm working on, you tell the story, and then it's a story, and then it's not a creative project. So, but my poems are written quite suddenly. There's kind of a spasm of something, and then the poem is done in like an hour or two or three usually. So I don't have time to tell anybody.
Yeah.
Something just comes in, and then I'm on. I'm writing, and I certainly wouldn't like call a friend and say, I'm about to write this poem, but I thought I'd talk it out with you so that I wouldn't have to write it. So that's not a big temptation for me. But I was really, in that poem, Mad Men, I was kind of riffing on that whole jinx superstition, at least, that you should not talk about a project as you're writing it or before you write it, because then it turns into an anecdote and not a creative work.
Your poem "Christmas Sparrow" appears in Bright Wings, which I just was recently looking at, and it's an illustrated anthology of poems about birds, which you edited, and you have a poem that. do you think you'll ever edit an illustrated anthology of poems about dogs? And what would you title it?
Oh, there are so many anthologies of, well, there's a poem, I think just a book called The Dog Poems, and then there's a book of poems called Unleashed, which is a book of poems written by dogs.
Huh, that's great.
And they're accompanied with often a photograph of the dog, and then the dog speaks. And the best of them, it's a very sad poem. It's a poem, you see the picture of the dog. It was a poem, a dog owned by Ben Sonnenberg. And it's the last poem in this collection, Unleashed. And there's a picture of the dog and his dates, so you know the dog is gone. And the title of the poem is Stay. And the poem is like this: Stay. I was a bad dog and didn't obey any command until today.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
You say a lot in a few words.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't, I'm a dog nut, but I think that's enough anthologizing for a while, yeah. Let's stick with the birds.
Yeah, so why birds? Why did you choose birds?
Columbia University Press came to me and said, would you do this?
Okay.
Because they had David Sibley, who was like the premier avian illustrator, and John James Audubon basically hands him the brush, and Sibley is the premier bird illustrator.
Wow.
So that we've got David Sibley interested in doing this, and that was just a thrill, because like most people who look out windows, I have Sibley's Guide to Birds, and it's sort of in the reference section. So we didn't really work together. We met at a reading after the book had come out.
Oh, wow.
But the difficulty of putting the book together, you're talking about Bright Wings, an illustrated anthology of poems about birds, was that they had to be specific species. It couldn't be, I saw a bird.
Yeah.
It had to be a lesser yellowlegs, or a two-wheat or something, or a cardinal. And so those made the poems harder to find, because a lot of poems about birds are just, bird.
Yeah.
You're looking at it, there's another bird.
Yeah.
Or the bird.
The bird.
Yeah, the bird at the window.
The birds.
The birds, plural. The birds in the sky. Yeah. See, those couldn't get in there.
Plato says that poetry comes nearer to vital truth than history. What do you think?
Oh, it's Plato
of that?
now.
Yeah, I'm just throwing them out
throwing
there.
out there. Just a Rolodex of heavy quotations here. Well, when Plato was writing, poetry was about history to some extent. Homer, for example, was about, that's before Plato, but poetry used to be about history because it was a way of recording events and making them memorizable and ennobling them. Now, or ever since, say, the English Romantic poets, 1798 or something, poetry is not about history. Poetry is about time. There's a difference there. Someone defined history as the violent misuse of time. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So lyric poetry is about time. It's about the romance of time, and that means that time is running out. So, so poetry is basically, to say it's about time is to say it's about mortality, and that's why the deepest and most resonant theme in poetry is carpe diem, and you carpe your diems because you don't have all them DMs left. You've got to get them while I can.
The DMs are running out.
Your DMs. Someone pointed out to me, a friend, so a little while back, that he said, "Do you realize that today you are 25,000 days old?" Gee, thanks a lot. I remember like 4 of them. That apparently there's something online where you can put in your birthday, and they'll tell you how many days old you are, and then you can see like. Here comes the big odometer number, like you're 10,000 days old, and
that's horrible.
It is horrible, yeah. And you wouldn't want, when you die, you wouldn't want to say, "Yeah, George made it to 33,473 days," and he didn't do a damn thing to make the world a better place.
That many days of doing nothing.
All those opportunities, and it was just like Diet Coke and watching TV,
What poets do you read and why?
I look at a lot of poems. I don't read a lot of them because I find reasons not to read them.
Okay.
Our former poet laureate, Kay Ryan, said that when one looks at a poem, the first thing you're doing is you're deciding whether to read it on certain grounds. It could be the title, could be the shape, could be a word or two. It just either looks inviting or it doesn't. And then you read it or not. Mm-hmm. So I would say I look at more poems and decide not to read them. This is a really bad on the microphone here, but
yeah.
I don't know, Charles Simic always comes to mind. I mean, Charles Simic is the poet who, I've gotten over my jealousy. Now it's just reduced to a simmering envy. It used to be a raging jealousy. I just couldn't believe how good he was and how simple the language was. Very unadorned, the apron, the street light, the bird, the bench, the cup. No adjectives, and that this complete aura of mystery about the whole thing. And the knife is mysterious. It's all mysterious. And I used to read Simic before I would write. I don't do that anymore, but I would just, if I'm going to write, I'd pick up Simic and read him for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. Not to write like him exactly, because no one can do that, but just he offered a model of simplicity and economy and at the same time deep mystery. And my reading of him prior to writing is just a small example of the most important thing a writer can do, which is allow himself or herself to come under the influence of other writers.
Yeah.
And that's the paradox, as someone put it out, of the writing life, is the only path toward originality, let's just say freshness even, is through imitation.
Okay.
So you have to imitate in order to find your own voice. Your own voice is not an inner thing. Mm-hmm. It's not an inner search. It's not looking introspectively for some authenticity. Your voice as a writer is in the library. It's all the voices of these other poets, and you have to find a way to combine them and convince people that it's original. It isn't original. It's
so
it's a mix.
You're sort of a mixologist then of voices.
You are a kind of a mixologist, or you could say, to turn to horror movies, it's a Frankenstein.
Yeah.
You take a little, a leg here and a shoulder there, and
that's great.
A couple of nails and some butcher's thread and a big needle, and then you stitch this creature together. And if you're lucky, it gets off the table and starts walking around. It's real. But no one says, "Hey, that's my uncle's arm." You can't tell where these parts have come from.
That's good. It's a creepy view of it, but yeah, that's really good.
It's good.
That's great.
Getting creepy on you.
Are there poets that you hate but read anyway?
No. I mean, you mean personally or just?
Either one. I mean, they could be personally or not. So.
No.
Well, the way you were talking about how you mimic a poet.
Yeah.
If you happen to read a poem that angered you in some way that you didn't like the way it turned out or something, would that ever inspire you to write something? No,
I think it's you're suggesting a kind of negative form of inspiration.
Yeah.
In which one looks at a lot of poetry or stories or whatever you're doing, and you say, I can do better than that. Yeah, I mean, that is an inspiration, I think. You have, these models whose work you're trying to imitate and you're trying to draw from, and then there are these awful writers or awful painters, and you're at the same time, you're thinking, I want to be like them, and you're thinking, well, at least I'm better than those people. You know what I mean? I'm doing better than those people.
Yeah.
So
do you think it's the same type of inspiration? Does it generate the same kind of work? Or do you think the positive trying to mimic?
Oh, it's the positive. Yeah,
better?
The other is just a kind of at least. At the very least, I'm doing better than some people. And it's sort of a measuring device to see where you are on the on your climb up to the top of Mount Parnassus, where the poetry gods are.
That's great.
Before you were assumed into goddom.
There's a rumor that you...
No, that never happened. No. That's a rumor. I wonder, Dom, if you could ask me one question as a special favor in the voice of Christopher Walken.
I would love to do that. That'd be fine, Bill.
Great.
Okay. So, Billy, you're a poet and you read your poetry. I was wondering, have you always been comfortable reading in public at the podium?
All right, stop. That's enough. No, I have not been comfortable. I can't do it. No. The statistics show that the most common fear in American life is public speaking, more than claustrophobia or being attacked by rats or those other phobias. So no, I was a nervous wreck.
Oh wow!
Early on, and here's an indication of how nervous I was. This would be a while back when sound systems were not as sophisticated. So you'd be at a lectern, right? And you'd have usually a cup of water, and then, or the cup of water would be underneath on a shelf, because no one has been smart enough to invent a lectern with a cup holder. It took 4,000, 5,000 years to put the suitcase and the wheel together. Now, we had the wheel early on, and we lugged stuff around from time immemorial. So like 20 years ago, suitcase wheel, hey, that might work. So no one has yet put the podium and the drink holder together, or the lectern. Podium's actually what you stand on.
Right.
From podiatrist, poet, foot.
Right.
Lectern is what you read from.
Okay.
Learned something new, and it's only 1 o'clock. So the water would be down here, but often the electronics would be down there too. So you'd have to, if you wanted a cup of water and you wanted to sip, because my mouth would be dry from nervousness.
Yeah.
You'd have to reach down into the sort of groping in the darkness in this combination of water and electricity. So I mean that's rather nerve-wracking to begin with. And then I'd be so nervous that if I had the cup, I couldn't get it to my lips, so I'd go like this, then I'd put it down. No, I was terrible. I was a wreck. And I just learned to, I saw a videotape of myself, and reading in some little cafe in New York. And for my trouble, they gave me $50 and then punished me by giving me a videotape. And I just looked like I was sweating bullets. It looks like I was about to be executed. I looked so nervous. And I remember looking at it and thinking, I'm just not going to do that anymore unless I figure out a way to do it. And it was basically just breathing, reading more slowly, getting the water away from the electricity, separating those two. But I don't think it's a natural gift, just getting up and saying things in public to a lot of strangers. I think you have to learn it. And
work at it.
You learn it in acting school or on your own, but yeah.
Would you like to speak about our conference here at Southampton?
Well, I was reminded by a former student that I've been coming here for 12 years. I always shaved time off my life, and I was thinking probably 7 or 8 years, but it's 12 years. And then in those days, I stayed in the dormitories. And I remember one weekend, the middle weekend, I didn't have anything to do. I drove all the way back to Westchester just to sleep in a comfortable bed and get some air conditioning. I was so intolerable in those dormitories. But I'm just astounded to see how the conference has grown. It was small, very small back then. There weren't any too many, glamorous, high-end writers, and now it's more students every year, more interesting writers, and the conference has also found this kind of core, and I'm very happy to be part of it. Of writers who return virtually every year.
Yeah.
They just can't get rid of us for some reason. But it's got this solid core, and we love to see each other. And there's this kind of reunion every summer. And then there are always the new players coming into the mix, so it makes for a healthy combination.
Well, thank you very much, Billy.
Pleasure.
It was great.
Pleasure, Don.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.